Hi, my name is Johan van Skalkwyk and I'm from CPD On Demand. This program deals specifically with the costing of energy in South Africa, and our presenter is Mike Rossouw from the Heavy Energy Users Group in South Africa. It's interesting how Mike will take us through the costing of energy, how it affects your business, whether there's a crisis or not in South Africa, what happens to foreign investment, and how that will affect your business in the long run.
I think as a country we are facing enormous challenges and very tough decisions that have to be made, and I'm not talking about even in the medium term, some of which are going to have to be made this year. In particular, the security of supply. I fear that whilst Eskom have been very open and frank with regards to the so-called tightness of supply, and I commend them for their frankness and openness about the situation, the actual dire situation as it actually is not coming across, and people are not fully appreciating the security of supply situation that we're facing. And it's not only this year, it's going to be for a number of years to come, where the reality of blackouts is real. And I'm not being an alarmist, I'm just telling you that we have done analysis. Obviously it's not part of my discussion today, but the situation is very serious. And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because there's a tight connection between pricing, in other words, the cost of energy, and the security of supply. There's a tight correlation between the two. And I'll just briefly touch on that in the presentation. So let me then immediately start. The picture explains how in industry we feel, in as far as that we're finding it difficult to get traction to pull the load. And the reason is, and it should be no surprise to anybody in this room, that we are facing an absolute deluge in policy, new policies, revised policies, updated policies, and so on. And whilst I think it's fully understandable for a new country such as South Africa that's developing, and in fact government taking a very leading role in the development and promotion of the economy and the transformation of society as a whole, which is commendable, it's just so much that society at large can absorb in terms of these policies. But really what I'm going to talk to you about, as I said, is the policies associated with electricity pricing. So I put to you that the engine room of our economy still is and will be for the time ahead. Not to say that we will transform it to a different style of economy, that's more than likely. But at this stage, it is a reality that the primary value chain and the mining energy complex of South Africa is still the foundation of what drives the economy. It is true that people will tell you that the GDP from this sector is small, but what is not appreciated, particularly in South Africa, it's actually the primary value chain that is generating the work for the secondary and tertiary sectors of the economy. They are selling commodities, they are selling services into the primary sector. So if you look at foreign direct investment, the bulk of it is coming from this sector. So there you can see it, that 55% of foreign direct investment, and that's where jobs come through in this sector. Then there's also a lot of discussion. In fact, it's interesting, if you look in the newspapers recently, I note that former President Thabo Mbeki has now been elected by the UN to head a task force into Africa, and particularly looking at the so-called escape of money from Africa. But actually, if you look at this, the mining energy sector, the bulk of the monies generated are plowed back in this country. So if you look at that slide, you'll see dividends, 25 billion. For the rest, all of this money is reinvested back into the country, whether it be in labor or whether it be in the procurement of commodities. So in terms of the mining and energy sectors, the bulk of their revenue is plowed back into the economy. Also, if you look at the slide, you'll notice that since 1993, there definitely has been significant GDP growth, which is the top line. But if you look at the colors, the bulk of that growth has come from non-tradable sectors. In other words, the financial sector, etc., and services. The tradable sectors, which is primarily the manufacturing sector, has not really seen any growth in GDP. And unfortunately, that is the sector, as I said, where the jobs actually do come from, particularly new jobs. AdCorp recently published this index in terms of employment index, and you'll see it has dropped since 2008. We know that the reason primarily is because of the financial crisis globally. But the question I put to you, and hopefully in the presentation it will come clear, where is that line going to go to now? Is it going to flatten? Is it going to increase? Or is it going to fall? I put to you that we have stated that the mining and energy complex in South Africa is at a tipping point for a number of reasons. I'm only going to talk to you about the energy costs. We did a survey of 7 of the largest consumers, which collectively, between the 7, speak of more than 10% of South Africa's energy. And you'll see that since 2007, electricity made out as a percentage of their total cost of production from 5% up to 30%, depending on the company itself. But if you have a look at it by 2012, the bottom has now moved up to about 10% and the top at nearly 45%. By 2015, if the original price increases that Eskom were requesting were to be awarded, some of those companies would be paying more than 50% of their cost of production to electricity. The rate at which these prices rise is not sustainable. Companies will not be able to absorb that. So you'll see that I'll talk to that in a minute about the rate of price rising. The ferrochrome industry in South Africa did a survey of all its members. And in this slide, what I'm showing you is that if costs are held constant, which is the blue bars at the bottom, all other costs except energy costs, that's the blue bars at the bottom, and that's base 2007. But also the selling prices are held constant. The reason we're doing this is to demonstrate that we're balancing that costs do rise and so do prices. But if you hold those constant and then only look at the inflation on energy, you'll see that this industry pretty much closes down by 2014, where the costs are equal to the margin. So again, what I'm trying to point out to you, the margins of all the large users are being squeezed to the point where they will more than likely have to exit. And you have seen in the press, a number of companies have indicated that they will be leaving. And we've also seen notices of other companies that will not be building their new facilities here, but we're building them elsewhere. This just demonstrates what's actually happening. So since 2001, if you look at this, the slides on your right, the blue is the amount of ferrochrome produced in the world by South Africa, which you can see was over 50%. In 2011, South Africa produced more than 50% of the world's ferrochrome. By comparison, China was about 5%, which is the red, and the rest on the top was the rest of the world. If the situation goes unchecked, by 2015, South Africa's share will have fallen below 40%, China's will have increased to over 25%. So essentially what's happening is South Africa is losing jobs and economic growth in this regard to China. And that in the face of the fact that we have the bulk, the majority of resources of chrome units in the world in South Africa. Now, to put it in perspective, these 3 metrics are the strong indicators of the efficiency of the particular ferrochrome producer. So the 3 metrics are whether it's an open or closed furnace. Closed furnaces are environmentally more friendly because all the gases are captured and can be recycled and or reused either in heat or in CO. Furnace size, the size of the furnace improves its efficiencies. And lastly, the power consumption, megawatts per ton. In all 3 metrics, South Africa is the most efficient converter of chromite ores into ferrochrome anywhere in the world. So here's the indictment from an environmental perspective. The most efficient converters, in terms of both emissions and efficiency, are escaping to countries where they are the least efficient at this stage in ferrochrome. It makes no sense. Also, there's a lot of debate and argument about South Africa's energy efficiency or intensity, and this slide clearly shows that since the mid-90s, our energy intensity has come down. Energy intensity of a country is 100% in relation to the type of economy that you drive, the economic model. Now, since the early 70s, right up to the mid-90s, the economic model and policy that was driven was to beneficiate very strongly and also resulted in direct investment into South Africa of very power-intensive industries. And that's what you see. That's why the energy intensity climbed so rapidly from the 70s. But by the mid-90s, that it stopped, and since then it's been in decline. So the energy intensity of South Africa is naturally already declining by 0.8% compounded average per annum, 0.8%. So I put to you the root cause of our current dilemma of so-called energy pricing. It's really just two things. So before I show you that, what this slide shows on the vertical axis is the price of electricity in US dollars per kilowatt hour. This is in constant terms. And in real terms, sorry, and on the horizontal axis is the years up to 2020. The many light bars are the industrial electricity prices available to industrial consumers in different regions of China and India, and all of them are showing increases, which we understand because they're also going through a build program as we are. The dark so-called orange line is the so-called comparative price path that was published in RP 2010 that shows the prices rising, if you have a look, from 2008, I beg your pardon, from just over 20, that's basically in US dollars, so that would be what, $2 US per kilowatt hour, and then it rises rapidly up to 2012, where we currently are at around about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and then rising even further. The point of the slide shows you that no matter which way you look at it, the prices are now rising to the upper end of those industrial prices. But here's the two things that we've got to look for. The rate at which prices rise, as I indicated to you, industry can only sustain such rapid increases for a short period of time because they have to adapt and adopt. If you'll absorb those prices, very few of them can pass on the prices because these are commodity prices determined by international markets. And the second issue, if it rises too high, in other words, the plateau. So the question is, how fast do prices rise and to what plateau? This is from the IRP. The blue line, the light blue line, is actually Eskom statistics. Also, electricity prices real, 2010, if I recall correctly, yeah. And you'll see that prices in South Africa, we know that, have stayed low and kind of around about the level of 20 cents SA to 35 cents for a very long period of time. And then they started rising for the reasons we know well in 2008. The yellow area is indeed the price ranges of industrial prices to manufacturers in China and India. And then the cone that I'm drawing there is the question mark, where does South Africa's price and where will it rise? Into the upper end of the cone or the bottom end? I'm going to share with you that I think we have an opportunity to get the price to the lower end of that cone rather than the upper end to satisfy all requirements, both the funding for Eskom, users' affordability of prices, and also our competitiveness. And again, remember, these prices exclude any carbon tax of any nature. So I'll just spend a second on this, so please just bear with me. The vertical axis is the percentage of total energy sold from 0 to 100%. And I'm looking at two countries, the United States and South Africa. Now, the reason I used the States, I could have used any other country. It's because it's the one country I could find reliable data, current data, and so I'll use it. It just illustrates, I think, the point. Horizontal axis is the cents, in South African cents per kilowatt hour. And so what you'll see there is there's a grey line at about 54 cents. That is the average South Africa wholesale price today. It's about 54 cents per kilowatt hour. So the blue line is prices in the United States, and I'm sure it looks like yellow, but the yellow line, if you can see it, is South Africa. So the way this thing works is as follows. If you read at the bottom axis, and let's just take a reading at, let's say, 54 cents. Can you see that? And take it up, and then if you read across, you'll see it's about 60%. What it says is that 60% of the total energy sold in South Africa buys electricity at 54 cents and below. Okay? So you'll see if you take it up to 95%, then you'll see 80 cents and below of electricity is sold to 90% of its consumption. That's how this works. So it's an accumulative of consumption at increasing price levels. So the first thing that you'll notice from this is that the curve in South Africa is very steep. It rises very, very rapidly compared to the United States. Secondly, the proportion of consumption in South Africa is predominantly industrial or manufacturing use. It's about 70-odd%. Then roughly about 15% commercial and domestic usage. Compared to the United States, where industrial is the smaller of the three, then residential and commercial are very similar. Okay. The point about this, because of the rise in South Africa, the rapid rise of this line, in the red area, those consumers have a very inelastic price elasticity of demand, meaning that if you push up the prices, you will not see much change in their demand patterns. The demand patterns are predominantly determined by market conditions, such as the demand for the commodities and other things, and not the price of electricity. Now, you may argue that's a good thing, but it's actually not, and I'll tell you why. They also have no opportunity to shift. They can't tomorrow choose other sources of energy. They are compelled to use this electricity in terms of their investment for assets and so on. But here's the problem, that as soon as those prices reaches a so-called tipping point, this is what happens. The demand falls, and if the demand falls, then the funding requirement falls onto the remaining users, which means the line falls forward. So it means that if we push the price too fast, too quickly, what we're going to see in South Africa is a significant drop of electricity demand. It will not be replaced by any so-called new incoming demand for that electricity, and prices will then soar. So this, I think, is the dilemma and the tipping point that we face in South Africa. And it's basically the current nature and structure of our economy and the way that it works. Then just quickly, we all know that electricity is made up of the following costs. On the top, you've got electricity generation. It's got to be transported at high voltage lines through the high voltage systems. And at that stage, large consumers take power at that level. There's medium voltage systems that take it to smaller commercial and other users and mining operations. Then you've got the so-called low voltage distribution systems where typically your and my house will be in. And so the costs are made up additively. First the generation costs, then the high voltage transmission, medium transmission, low voltage transmission, and that's how the costs are made up to supply electricity. Well, because in South Africa 70% is consumed by consumers who are connected to the high voltage system, it means that the costs associated with the medium and low voltage systems fall entirely to a very small proportion of the consumers, i.e. in this case residential and commercial. And in addition to that, there are levies and surcharges. So this is how it looks. You'll see that the blue bars indicate roughly the cost to supply energy, in other words, the cost to generate it. And you'll see the cost to everybody in South Africa is about the same, 30-odd cents. It's slightly higher for us people and domestics such as you and I. It's 34, and the reason for that is because there's electricity losses which are recouped from them because they're far from the generation source. By far the biggest cost to the small consumers is in the distribution networks and the retail services provided, which they have to bear fully because the consumers that are taking off high voltage do not bear those costs. And so to even that out what's happening here, you'll see that these are all the different tariff classes right across the board, from public lighting, traction, night save. So those are classically the tariff classes that you have, that Eskom have. The blue is the average charge, and the grey is the average cost to supply. So for every time that the blue line is greater than the grey, it basically means, if you have a look, for example, there in business rate, it means they are being charged 74 cents, and the cost to supply them is 68 cents there. So there's a plus of 6 cents, if you can see that. So every time there's a plus, it means those tariff classes are paying a surcharge, which is used to pay the subsidies for the other tariff classes, and that's where the blue line is in the negative. So you'll see Home Light are effectively receiving a 33-cent subsidy. And that's for the reasons of cost of supply. So why I'm showing this to you is to demonstrate again that if we lose large consumers' demand, these subsidies fall away, and the question is where are those subsidies going to come from to subsidize the small consumers? This is a survey we did of consumers, industrial consumers who are purchasing electricity from municipal suppliers. And so the first bar shows you the Megaflex tariff, which these consumers will pay were they supplied by Eskom, and it's roughly about 54 cents per kilowatt hour. And then the bars on top of the other are the prices that we surveyed being paid by similar companies in municipal areas. And you can see the markup ranges from 26% to 100% of the Eskom price. Now, it's justified for the municipalities to add a markup because they have to recover the cost to supply those people, but not these markups. So what's happening here again is these people are paying a burden to subsidize the consumers within the municipality areas, which means we're basically starving the economy and therefore jobs. So we are losing our competitive advantage. These are prices for silicon smelters around the world. As you know, silicon metal is used to produce electronic components, in particular photovoltaic cells. And you'll see these smelters in South Africa in 2008 paid the lowest prices in the world. And by 2011, that's already, they are the most expensive in the world compared to the countries that I'm showing at the bottom. Similarly with steel producers, you'll see that the red line indicates where the price is going to go if we don't have a so-called rational approach, which basically means South Africa is moving to the middle or upper quartile of prices for steel manufacturing, meaning we will not be able to refine and produce steel in the country. We'll more than likely import it. Therefore, all we'll export is the ores and import the steels. Same picture for the ferrochrome producers. You'll see they were the lowest, or one of the lowest, in 2008. By 2011, they were now one of the highest, not quite. China was still higher than them in 2011. But what I then added were the price increases that Eskom still indicated that they wish to have. Hopefully that will change, which basically puts this industry out of business as well. So what is the solution? There are 4 things that we've got to do. We have to have a viable, fundable industry. In other words, we can't support growing electricity, whether it be in whatever form of generation, renewables or otherwise, unless there's appropriate prices to pay for that generation. Secondly, we've got to protect our global competitiveness while we're busy with the transition. Otherwise, how can we sustain jobs? We can't feed the very economy we want to transition. There needs to be economic growth, that's obvious. And we need social development and social transformation. Those things are obvious, everybody knows that, but the question is the balance. So when I say our common purpose, that's in terms of the large industrial users, we know, and Eskom knows, that we have a symbiotic relationship. We have to be there for the country and ourselves, and vice versa. And if the prices are too low, we can't pay for the new generating capacity. But if it's too high, we lose demand and job growth, and we have a price runaway situation. And there are, in fact, a few levers that can be looked at to get the price path in a so-called rational trajectory. So what are these? This is not supposed to be complex, but sometimes it could look so. So just have a look at the second column from the left. It says revenue requirement. Now, I have to tell you this because not many people appreciate this. Eskom's price is not regulated. Their revenue is regulated. I'm going to say this again, Eskom's revenue is regulated, not the price. The price that we pay is a calculation based on Eskom's revenue, which they are allocated. How does the regulator determine Eskom's revenue? They look at prudent expenditure. I emphasize prudent because the regulator has discretion to reject any costs applied for which they don't believe are prudent. The prudent expenditure then is a sum of the cost of sales, plus the operating costs, plus the overhead costs, plus asset depreciation. So the total of that ends up to the so-called prudent expenditure. They then provide the regulator with the forecast of energy sales. That's on the next one on, says energy sales. And on the energy sales divided into the revenue requirement will give you the average tariff. So again, let's just do it quickly. Eskom's revenue is determined by NERSA. However, Eskom are also allocated a return on their assets, which effectively is determined by their weighted average cost of capital and the asset base. And there are other expenditures, as you can see, capex and levies and taxes and so on, and IPP purchases. So each one of these represent a lever that government and Eskom have available to look at. In other words, not change the model, not change the economic policy. It's a question of what are the values, what is the rate of return that would be fair and reasonable for Eskom. We did a study on this, and this is what we found. So in the IRP maximum price path, which is the blue line, this is all in real terms, it shows the price still rising rapidly from the current price of 50-odd cents, and it keeps rising up till about 2020, and then it plateaus at roughly around about 120 cents or R1.20 per kilowatt hour, all in real terms. Eskom have now requested, and it's based on a revision of a number of factors, and they believe that they can slow the price down, or rather have indicated that it may be possible to slow the price down, but still the price plateaus at roughly 90 cents per kilowatt hour. We believe that if you put in more IPP builds, and you also reduce the rate of return from the current real 8.14 cents, which is what NERSA used, to 5%, you can reduce that plateau to roughly about 80 cents. And lastly, if you relook at the levies, in other words, because it's a social tax, and refer it to the fiscus rather than electricity prices, you can get the prices down to 70 cents. So it's just an illustration that there are things that can be done and looked at, not to say that they have to or will. But the point that I think I should be making to you is that even if, and assuming if, we do all of that and get the price to a plateau of 70 cents per kilowatt hour, it will not be low enough for some. And maybe that is the reality that we're facing here. We cannot ever talk about South Africa having the lowest prices in the world. That's a reality. But the one thing I wanted to put to you, which is not well appreciated about this slide, independent power producers today will put capacity online. They'll come to the market at a price plateau of 80 cents per kilowatt hour. Think about this. Independent power producers will come to the party for 80 cents per kilowatt hour. The question we should then ask is, why should it be higher than 80 cents per kilowatt hour? If IPPs tomorrow will come to the market and say, look, we'll put capacity on the line for 80 cents per kilowatt hour. So I want you to bear that in mind. But unfortunately for IPPs, the playing field is not level. So what I'm showing you here is that there are basically the following forms of generation. You'll see it says on the top, own use and sell. There are fundamentally only two forms of generating for power. You produce power for yourself, or you produce power to sell it to somebody. Now, for good measure, I've shown on the very right-hand side Eskom compared to those four classes of generation. So the colors also indicate the extent of uncertainty. And then I've shown on the left-hand side key issues, such as, for example, recovery of cost of generation, environmental tax, reliability and loss of cost, transmission network charges. These are factors that are important to any investor that it wishes to generate electricity. So in the current policy space, what I'm showing you is the level of uncertainty of factors, of a number of factors for these various producers. So I'm going to pick on two. Let's look at own use and the very left-hand column, which is the simplest of own use. That's where somebody produces power at his site for his own use only. In other words, he produces power on his premises only to use for himself. So we could argue this is a case where, let's say, you as a domestic consumer put photovoltaic panels on your rooftop, and you then augment some of your demand with your solar electricity that you generate. So you'd be on the left-hand side of the column. So it's your business. You don't bother anybody. You do it at home for yourself, and that's simple. The next column is a little bit more complex. Now you're a big player. Let's say you're a very ambitious homeowner, and you put in a lot of photovoltaic cells, not only to generate it for yourself, but you produce enough to basically sell to Eskom or the municipality, whoever is your supplier. So that's where you produce for yourself, but you produce and to sell across the network. Then you've got the other one where you sell to the national buyer. That would be typically an independent power producer who puts up a power plant and then just sells to Eskom in this case, or the ISMO as envisaged. And the last one is sell to the grid. That is, for example, a power station, let's say in argument's sake, say Mozambique, who then wishes to sell power to individual customers themselves, but obviously have to contract with the transmission system supplier so that they can wheel the power from their power station in Mozambique to their customers in South Africa. And so you can see that at this point in time, the most difficult and nearly impossible scenario is the sell via the grid to your own customers. What it means is if there's a large, let's say, green energy producer, argument's sake, say, I don't know, in Namibia, let's say, and they wish to sell green power to consumers directly in South Africa, the chance of being able to do that is virtually nil. So if you wanted to buy all your power green from a supplier in Namibia, you can't do it because look at the constraints. If you wanted to do it at home, it's quite easy. You can see there's one or two, which is the very left-hand side. You'll see there's a few areas of uncertainty, but by and large, you can convert yourself to so-called green power very quickly, no problem at all. Less easy if you wanted to produce your own green power, let's say a wind farm in the Cape, but then have all the energy that is produced in the Cape credited to your consumption, let's say in Rustenburg. Also very difficult, which is the second column. And then more easy if you wanted to produce green energy and just sell it to Eskom where they get the carbon credits and everything else. That can easily be done, but you lose the advantage of that. So the playing field is not level. So if policy recommendations which have been made be put in place, we can turn a number of those red areas into yellow and hopefully green. So in conclusion, I have to say to you, this is not a problem of either government or Eskom or business. It's a South African problem. It's a collective problem. We really do need to work together on this one to find a solution. Thank you.